Apparently, when you review horror films, you just can't seem to get away from puppets. Hello and welcome to Rotted Review of the Day, and we are back after a couple of week-long vacation / getting hit by a car and extending that vacation out. We are now back, and there have been some pretty major changes that I should probably go over before I get into this review of the movie Possum. Most notably, I think the biggest change is the fact that we are going from a 7-day-a-week broadcast to a 5-day-a-week broadcast after doing 200 movie reviews and balancing that with full-time job and a family and other responsibilities as well as other hobbies. It was just a bit much to do one every single day without a break. So instead, we're going to go to a 5-day-a-week broadcast. It's going to be every weekday. I'll be spending the weekends kind of doing behind-the-scenes work, research, watching movies, and making notes, but giving myself a little bit more time to breathe. And because of that, we last left off with having themed days, a different theme for every day of the week. And now that we're going 5 days, that had to get shifted. So it's not a huge change, but the biggest one is Netflix and Shudder specific days are now dropped, and it is going to be My Pick Monday, Torture Me Tuesday, which is your suggestions. If you want to suggest a movie for me to watch, I will add it to the list and then randomly draw from that. If it's something that you think I'll like, or you want to basically just have a review done of a movie, go for it. If you want to actually pick something, I believe that somebody picked Mega Python versus Gatoroid is now in the drawing mixture, and we will see when that comes up. So yes, if you do want to torture me with a bad movie, as long as IMDb lists it in its meta tags as horror, and it's not part of a franchise, because that would be covered in a different segment. So don't recommend to me, Leprechaun in Space, because that would be covered under the Leprechaun series. But other than that, make your suggestion, torture me, and I'll review it on a Tuesday at some point. And then we're still having World Trotting Wednesday, Throwback Thursday, and Franchise Friday. So getting right into it now, the movie Possum, made in 2018 in the UK. So this is a movie that I thought was rather interesting. I kind of picked it mostly, to be perfectly honest, on the box art. I thought it was rather intriguing. I'm not terribly super comfortable with spiders, and the poster really grabbed me. I purposefully wanted something to test my scare me kind of ability, wanted something to see if I can put goosebumps on my arms again. And I will say that although this movie is very unorthodox, it did manage to wind up doing that. This is a very unsettling story. And it's a really fantastic representation in my mind of a movie that it bucks the trend of linear storytelling, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and throw up all the scores right here. As always, 25 points available for each particular category for a total possible score of 100 points. So this movie follows the character of Philip, who is a sourpuss face kind of guy. Wears a trench coat, keeps to himself, has some pretty massive RBF going. And it's a little difficult to describe in any kind of bullet point description of the film what's going on, but I guess the 5-mile overview of it is he is wrestling with internal demons that are symbolized using an external puppet of a large spider. He goes and stays in his old house, which is dilapidated. He talks with Maurice, who is somebody that you get an idea was a big influence in his childhood. And all the while he's trying to, in one way or another, wrangle himself by trying to destroy this puppet, which is creepy to say the least. And that's pretty much about the only real, coherent description I'm going to be able to give of this movie in any kind of bullet point fashion. I think in order for me to really describe what this movie has going for it and the merits behind it, I'm going to need to kind of look at it from a technical 5-mile overview point of view and compare it with other types of storytelling. Most movies that you'll watch have a very linear type of storytelling. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, or, it follows a fairly standard formula of, first 10 minutes you establish your characters and you establish the conflict, and then you watch the characters try to overcome the conflict and so on and so forth. So, you set up, this is Paul, and Paul is this guy, and this is what's happening to him. But, oh no, we have this happening now. How is Paul going to overcome that? And it just follows that in a very linear progression. And even when you have movies where the main character is of a fractured mindset, oftentimes the storytelling itself is following a structured narrative. Linear progression, coherent storyline, just watching them unravel. But every once in a while, in a case like that, you are not necessarily watching it through the eyes of the main character, because the main character's mind is kind of, fractured. But you are watching it through whom you presumably trust is the coherent eyes of a lucid storyteller. And then you wind up with films that buck the trend entirely and go their own route. And in this case, it has the fractured mind of a main character, and the storytelling narrative is not necessarily from their point of view, but it puts the audience right in the driver's seat with them. You understand their confusion of the real world because you yourself have confusion over the narrative. You understand that there are things that are dangerous and things that are unsettling because you experience that with the character. There's a lot of hopping around. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of false flags. There's a lot of very, very fractured narrative with this movie in the visuals, in the timeline. And it's almost like watching a very, very inebriated friend try to tell a very complex, long story. And they're hopping around, and there's bits they're leaving out, and there's stuff that they're focusing on that you wouldn't think was that important, but somehow it kind of comes together to put you in the driver's seat of that level of uncomfortable, unsettling anxiety. And that's what this movie does. And that's not necessarily for everybody. I particularly did like it, especially on the technical level. I'm not going to say it was my favorite movie in the world. It certainly wasn't my favorite storyline in the world, but it was deeply unsettling, and it did put me in that place of anxiety along with the main character as his downward spiral was going. So too was I following him as I watched it, and that's something that I think is a rare moment of cinematic storytelling for me. I really did enjoy it. In a very, macabre sort of way, but that's kind of the mindset of a horror fan, I believe, is to kind of experience those levels of anxiety and fear and so forth, within the safety of, knowing that you can always hit the stop button. So I did like it, and I think it worked on the intent level, but at the same time, I can really, really understand why other people wouldn't. If you watch this movie and you're watching this review of it and you didn't care for this movie at all, I get it. There were parts that were very drawn out. The pacing was very, very peculiar, and it certainly is not for everybody. But I did like it myself. I thought the acting was done very, very well. And for that kind of feeling to be elicited from me, the audience member, I thought that on a technical level, that was absolutely brilliant. And it really was a testament to the direction, but I think chiefly was the editing. Somebody had to have taken all that footage, and it would have been very easy to tell a very Hollywood-esque, cinematic, linear, coherent storyline if you were to taking all the dailies and you were editing them together and you wanted to make that decision. You could have. So I think a lot of that fractured storytelling feel to it did come down to the editing and the editing choices that were made in post-production. And although I can imagine it doesn't work for everybody, it did work for me, and I thought that it played that very, very well. So that gives, with a total score of 79 out of 100 points. And this is the weird thing, is because as much as I did love it, I really can't recommend it. I enjoyed it from start to finish. I did. I thought that the spider was particularly creepy, and the way that it played out, and what was living and what wasn't, and all this stuff that was going on in the movie that confused the heck out of me and put me in a place of the same confusion as the main character. I enjoyed it. But it's not one that I could really recommend to all horror lovers. This movie requires patience, it requires interpretation, it requires thoughtfulness, and it requires discussion. And not everybody wants something like that in a film where they, pop a bucket of popcorn and click the play button. It's just not your traditional, hour and a half long enjoyment, theatrical experience. But if you are willing to be patient, if you are willing to open yourself up to the interpretation of it, the thoughtfulness of it, and have a movie that, if you are going to kind of keep that open mind and understand that this is a non-linear, fractured storyline that is eliciting feelings more than it is coherent storytelling, then especially if you're watching it with friends that are willing to go that same level with you and engage in discussion afterward, this movie really stuck to my ribs several days later. I was constantly thinking about it, and I wish I had watched it with somebody else to discuss it more. But I mean, if that's something that you are willing to go through, then absolutely I would recommend Possum. But otherwise, buyer beware. I guess that's what I'll say. Yeah, if you're looking for a traditional, 3-act play brought to the screen with, potentially happy endings and so on, you're probably not going to care for this one too much. But that said, I do recommend this one with a big asterisk next to it that I've already covered. So that should about do it. That's my review of 2018's Possum. I really thank you for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. If you like these videos, please click like and subscribe. If you want to support me further, my Patreon link is below. I only have one tier, and that's $1 a month subscription to just kind of help me further if you like these. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.